Hey everyone, welcome back to ctrl-alt-rees. I'm Rees, and this is a POS, a point of sale PC. And yes, I know a few of my fellow tech YouTubers have covered these already, and they've all made that exact same joke without exception. But how could I resist? Anyway, in this new mini-series for December 2021, I'm going to investigate whether I can help this tiny AMD K6-2 PC, which I bought on eBay for £30, finally achieve its true potential as a DOS gaming powerhouse. So, part 1, and what are my plans for this thing? Well, in this video I'm going to do a good old-fashioned teardown to investigate the hardware and clean out 20 years worth of dust. And as it seems to just have a very minimal install of FreeDOS at the moment, I'm going to take a look at the hard drive and see if I can recover anything interesting. What I can tell you is that this thing has a 450MHz AMD K6-2 and 128MB of RAM, so I'll definitely investigate the possibility of upgrading those over the next few weeks, as well as adding a sound card and Voodoo graphics for some early 3D DOS gaming goodness. Of course, with this thing having come out of a shop where it was presumably used as a till system, it has a few weird quirks like an external power supply, a diagnostic mode that boots MS-DOS from a ROM chip, and some weird ports and connectors, which I'll also investigate further over the course of this video. So this is a point of sale PC, meaning that it would have been used on the shop floor at a retailer. In this case, it was a local clothes shop, not all that far from me, although I did buy this on eBay, like I mentioned. And this is actually just a standard PC with a standard BIOS. As we can see, just booting up here, it has an AMD K6-2 450 CPU as advertised, and 128MB of RAM, with 4MB of that being shared with the onboard graphics. And if we just allow it to continue to boot, it will boot from the internal hard drive. And then, as you can see, this is just running a very bare bones install of FreeDOS, which I can only assume is an effort by the previous owner to wipe it and to potentially delete any personal or sensitive data that may have been stored on it. And if we just run the dir command, we can see that there's literally nothing on there. But this machine does have quite an interesting trick up its sleeve. And if I just flap down at the front and press this button, now you would think that that would be the power button, especially with that power label next to it. But actually it's a onboard diagnostics button. And if we now power cycle the PC, this time when it boots, it will boot into a version of MS-DOS which is actually installed on an internal ROM chip. So if we press a button here, just to select the language, it boots with this lovely splash screen and then goes into a self-test mode where it's actually testing the internal hardware and searching for devices on the 4 COM ports. And the COM ports on this machine are actually quite interesting because they can be configured to actually provide power, and that's something that I will look at when we tear this thing down in a moment. But yeah, they can be used to actually power things like receipt printers, barcode scanners, cash drawer, magnetic stripe reader, and that kind of thing. And that's the kind of stuff that you can actually test with this self-test program as well. And this is just a bog standard MS-DOS executable, which is quite interesting. So we'll just let it run through this initial test process, which is nearly finished. And there we go. So we can select from 3 different tests from this menu. So if we just choose number 1, we have a very basic keyboard test. Just press each key in turn and press any key 3 times to finish. So that just takes us back to the main menu. We've got a test for the barcode scanner, which is prompting us to scan a barcode. Of course, I don't have a barcode scanner, so I'm just going to have to wait for that to time out. But presumably that just sits and waits for input from that, just to check that it's connected and working okay. And the third test is for the magnetic stripe reader. So, of course, if this was used as a till system, it would have had a magnetic stripe reader for taking payments from credit and debit cards. So, yeah, built-in way to test that as well. So if we press 4, it just exits the test program, and it basically says if you wish to return to your application, press the button. But I'm not going to do that because there's actually something quite interesting that I can show you. And if I just allow this to reboot again, so being DOS, obviously we can hold down the Shift key while this is booting. I'll just wait for it to finish doing the drive stuff. So if I hold down the Shift key now, rather than running the AUTOEXEC.BAT and CONFIG.SYS stuff, it will bypass all of that and just go straight into DOS. And as we can see, this is a different version of DOS to what we booted from on the hard drive a minute ago, and that's because this is the DiskOnChip installed inside this computer. We'll have a closer look when we have a look inside in a moment, but it is literally just a bog standard version of DOS 6.22, just with some executables on it, and yeah, everything is basically a bog standard DOS executable. So yeah, just an interesting thing to see, and does make me wonder whether that functionality could be repurposed with a custom ROM chip perhaps, and maybe have a DOS gaming machine that automatically boots into a pre-installed version of Doom or something, which might be quite interesting, but I'm not quite sure what the possibilities with that are, so perhaps something for a future project. But anyway, now we've taken a look at the very basic software which is installed on this at the moment, I think it's time we took a look inside. So this is the actual hardware itself, and one of the ways that they've managed to make this so small is by making the power supply external, which is quite interesting. And this is basically just a completely bog standard AT or ATX type power supply. It's exactly the same size. It even has the same screw holes in it. All it has is just this additional kind of lug on the front with some screw holes in there. I think hopefully you can see those. And these are just used to mount it basically to a wall or underneath a work surface just next to where the PC would have been based. And it's just a way of keeping, like I say, keeping the actual size of the unit down, but also keeping some heat and some noise kind of away from the main unit. So this could be buried well inside a till or something. Or a checkout at a shop. So yeah, quite an interesting aspect of these point of sale PCs. The output from this power supply is literally just 5 volts and 12 volts. Let me just unplug it. So this is an XLR style connector just with a button on it, and it's 4 pins, and that's literally just 2 ground pins and 12 and 5 volts. I've tested that separately earlier. Now the PC itself is designed to be very easy to service and to work on, and very easy to get into, and it's all very thoroughly covered in the manual, which is fantastic. And I just wanted to give a big shout out to a friend of the channel, CRG, who also owns one of these and has covered this on his own channel, and I'll put a link to that video down in the description because he's the one who managed to dig up the manual. So yes, that has been incredibly useful. So just before we open this up, we'll take a look at the ports on the back, because there's some quite interesting and non-standard stuff here if you're used to working with standard PCs. So obviously we have that power connector, which I showed you just a second ago, but also on this kind of power section we have an AC out, which is for powering external devices, like as mentioned, those peripherals like printers and that kind of stuff. Another proprietary power connector here, and these 2 RJ10 connectors, which apparently are for cash drawers. So if you're using this as a till, these can power the cash drawer and also get the status of whether the lid's open or closed and that kind of thing. So just quite an interesting proprietary thing there that of course you won't have seen on a standard PC. Other than that, it's all pretty standard. We have an RJ45 LAN connector there, which is a Realtek chipset, which we'll have a look at once we get the lid off. These COM ports are quite interesting. As I briefly mentioned during the diagnostics thing, these can actually be configured to output a particular voltage on pin 9, and that's selectable between a few different voltages as covered in the manual, just for powering different peripherals. So let's take a look at how that works. And I've already removed the 2 screws at the back that just hold this case on. So to get inside it, it's literally just a case of pulling on that, and the whole thing slides open very easily, which is really nice. Very easy to work on. And I'll just get this out of the way. So if you've seen the inside of a PC before, and I'm going to assume that if you're watching this channel you probably have, a lot of this will look very familiar to you. So of course we have the a bog standard 3.5 inch IDE hard drive there. That's just a 4.3 gig Seagate unit. I remember these actually from back in the day with the rubber coating on them. They were quite popular and quite good drives. Under that we have of course bog standard floppy drive, and on the other side of the case here we have some expansion slots. And of course, these have the standard blanking plates on the back, and the actual slots internally are literally just 2 PCI slots and 2 ISA slots, and one of those is underneath. And evidently with this top slot you can either use one of those or the other, but not both at the same time. And it does mention in the manual that this machine can be spec'd with a PCI sound card, which I can only assume would have gone into one of these 2 slots, and I can only assume that this wasn't spec'd with that because it doesn't have one. But that's not a problem at all. I have plenty of spare sound cards that I can pop into this, and that is something that I'm going to be doing in the next episode to obviously bring this up to spec as a DOS gaming PC, because it doesn't have onboard audio. You will also notice that the interesting stuff is on the other side. So this is an SIS 5595. I think this is the Southbridge chip. This is actually an SIS 530 chipset, this motherboard. And as you can see from the bottom, it's quite nice and compact. We've got that DiskOnChip here, which is what boots that diagnostic version of DOS. We've got the nice fan here, which could probably be replaced with a silent fan later on. As you probably heard, it's quite a noisy machine, so I think replacing the fans might be a good idea. And just over this side, we can see that we have the RAM, which is a laptop type SODIMM, and this is labelled PC100. I don't have any PC100 laptop RAM around, but I do happen to have this PC133 512 meg module here. So I think I'm going to try dropping that in and just seeing if that works. Speed-wise, it should be fine. They are backwards compatible with the lower speeds, but it's whether this motherboard supports 512 megabytes. Because it would be nice to put Windows 98 on this and do some Windows 98 gaming. I think it would be a really good spec for that. Now, as far as the CPU is concerned, that's underneath this heat pipe setup here. So let's take that off now. And oh yes, that's nice and dusty inside there, so I'll give that a blast out with the air compressor. But this is a really clever piece of design, and this is quite similar to how a modern laptop is called, of course. So we have the CPU on one side of the machine, and as we can see, that is indeed an AMD K6-2, that's labelled as. And we have this copper pipe arrangement with a radiator on the end, which comes to this fan just here. So we can actually separate the CPU itself and the cooling of said CPU and spread that out and keep it nice and flat without having to have the extra height of the fan on this side of the machine. So yeah, that obviously vents into the kind of big open void on this side where the expansion cards and things go. So yeah, really clever design that. But evidently something that needs cleaning. It's also nice to see that this is a socketed CPU, which isn't always the case with these embedded systems. So that could be upgraded, and I believe this motherboard can go all the way up to an AMD K6-3 Plus. I don't think I'll bother upgrading that. I think that's probably overkill for what I want this for. But it's nice to know that I do have that option available to me in the future. And finally, now this is all stripped down, I just wanted to mention the one really interesting and unique aspect of this particular PC, and that is this power distribution board, as it's referred to in the manual. And just looking at the manual, the really interesting part of this is that it has these connectors which go to the individual COM ports, which of course is something you wouldn't see in a standard PC. And what they do is they connect to pin 9 of the RS232 serial port, and they deliver a voltage to that pin. So that pin is usually used for the ring indicator, which is used for modems and stuff. So evidently the computer knows if the phone line is ringing and whether it should answer the modem. But in this case, these can actually be powered, and this is a bit of a proprietary thing to this style of PC. And there are some warnings in the manual about not enabling this if you have a standard modem connected, or there is a very good chance that you could blow it up. And the way that you can configure the voltages for these is just with these very interesting jumpers here, and they can just be moved around to different positions, which of course are very clearly labelled, and literally just change the voltage coming out on that pin of the COM port. Now, because I don't actually need any of this stuff, because I'm never going to be connecting any of that kind of hardware to this ever again, I am wondering whether this quite big space here could be repurposed, and maybe I could put something like a Pico PSU or something in here and lose that external power supply, which would be really good. Obviously we have 4 COM ports on here as well, so I could, if I needed the space behind these 2 ports, I could probably lose those as well and just keep the 2, because this does also have PS2 ports, which is incredibly useful. But now this is stripped down to this point, I think what I'll do is just strip it down a little bit further, take these drives out because I want to have a look at those anyway, and take it out to the garage and blast all of the dust out with the air compressor. So now that's all nice and clean and ready to go back together, I want to take a look at this drive as promised. And the way I'm going to do that is just by hooking it up using an external IDE to USB adapter, which just plugs in like this. And also power to the drive like so. This also takes an external power adapter, which I'll plug in a second, and I will plug that into my Raspberry Pi, which I set up in my previous video. There will be a link to that down in the description. So that's just a USB 3 adapter there, and then we'll VNC into the Pi and have a poke around at this drive and see what we can find. So with the hard drive connected to that external USB adapter and plugged into my Raspberry Pi, as we can see we have it mounted on the desktop here. And of course I've already booted this up and discovered that there is a very basic installation of FreeDOS on here, which literally consists of these 2 files, nothing else to show here. We'll see if we can see any hidden files on here, but no, not expecting anything interesting. So I'll just take a look at the partition layout on here. And as suspected, it's just the single 4GB FAT32 partition, 8.19 megabytes used. So yeah, but surely it must be the case that they've just wiped this and just done a very basic format on it just to install FreeDOS. So perhaps there's something on here that's worth recovering. Now, obviously, I'm not interested in personal information or anything that's commercially sensitive or anything like that. To be honest, realistically, having worked in this kind of retail environment myself, I think it's quite likely that any sensitive information would have been stored remotely on a server somewhere in a separate database, so I'm not expecting to find anything like that. It would just be interesting to see what operating system this machine was running originally, and if there were any other sort of applications and things running on there. And I think the first thing that I want to do is just before I touch any of the partitions or anything, I have taken an image of this. If I just take a look in my home directory on here. So I've already used DD just to create an image of the hard drive just before I start messing with anything, just in case. Like I say, I don't think there's anything useful or anything particularly worth recovering. There may be drivers on here as well, which could potentially be quite useful if this was running Windows, and I do want to install Windows on here at some point in the future. If there are drivers for any kind of proprietary hardware or anything, that would be very useful to have. So always a useful thing to do whenever getting your hands on a new PC for the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a folder here, just preemptively. So I'll just do that in the home directory, and then I'll go into the terminal, and the command I'm going to run is PhotoRec, which, as the name implies, was originally designed for recovering photos from SD cards, corrupted or deleted files from digital cameras and that kind of thing. It's kind of grown into something much bigger. The author, Christophe Grenier, also makes a tool called TestDisk, which I'm going to be looking at in a minute as well. We've got dev/sdb, which is our 4GB hard drive here, so I'll just choose that. FAT32 partition, so we'll search that. I'll pick other because obviously it's a FAT partition. We'll go for the whole drive. And please select destination to save recovered files. So I'll pick that folder that I've just created. And now what this will do is just read through every sector on the disk from beginning to end, looking for deleted files, and it will copy them into that directory on a separate disk. And obviously it's important that that directory is on a separate disk because anything that we write back to this disk could potentially overwrite something that we're looking to recover. So I'll just let that run through to the end. It looks like it's finding plenty of files so far. Of course, whether that's anything useful or not remains to be seen. But let's let this run and then see what we have. And so that took just over 5 minutes to run, and it seems like it has recovered 2,896 files. So we've certainly got a lot of stuff to go through. So let's take a look at that. Obviously I'm done with this now, so we'll just quit this utility. And let's have a look at what we have in here. Now, yes, obviously it doesn't preserve the original directory format, directory layout, which is a bit of a shame. But it seems like the vast majority, just watching it as it was going through recovering stuff, are text files, which I'm not really sure what these are, if they'll be log files or something. That looks like potentially some kind of driver related thing. We'll have a look at some others. Yeah, modem drivers maybe, potentially. Of course, if you see anything you recognise, do let me know, because it would be very interesting to know what these are. Of course, .txt wasn't necessarily the original file extension. The one thing that it can't recover, it can recover the actual data from the files, but not the original file names and extensions, of course, because they are usually saved in the file allocation table on the file system, and the way that deletes them is just by deleting that pointer. So, of course, it also loses that information. Oh, this is useful. What's this? Again, this looks like networking. Perhaps some kind of README or help related file. PPP servers with Windows NT 3.51 RAS clients. So some references to Windows NT. That's interesting. Obviously I'm not going to go through every single one of these files. There is an XML file here. Just take a look at that. Carve report, PhotoRec. Oh, I see. Okay, so that's just generated by PhotoRec itself. That makes sense. So we'll just check out this second one. Again, lots and lots of text files, and they look very similar here. Again, more references to Windows NT, so quite likely that this was running NT, and yeah, definitely a very strong possibility for a retail type appliance, shall I say, like this. We have some zip files here. I wonder if there's anything in those. Yeah, seems like we can't open those, and that's been my experience with this tool in the past as well. Obviously it only takes, unlike a text file where if there's a bit of it missing it's not really a problem, a zip file does all need to be sort of there and complete to actually work properly, as with any binary files or anything like that. So yeah, a lot of this stuff seems to be sort of system related. I have some HTML files here as well. Interesting. Metrics clients, metrics server. I haven't heard of that before. Something to look into. But anyway, let's keep working our way through these. So yeah, literally just loads and loads of text files. I'm not really sure what these refer to. I have to admit I was hoping to find something a bit more interesting than this, but hey, we have to work with what we're given. So, oh, that's a log. Oh, okay, Oracle. That's interesting. So yeah, as suspected, oh, this is obviously some kind of EPOS log 2002. So yeah, as suspected, this is running some kind of Oracle client, I think, Oracle EPOS. It's probably connecting to a database on a remote server somewhere, obviously where all of those transaction details and things would be stored. So, of course, they wouldn't be stored locally on the actual PC itself. Very interesting stuff. So I presume these are probably all connected to this log. Oh, that's an Ethernet driver for Windows NT again. So I'm pretty confident that this was running Windows NT. And obviously all of the stuff I've found so far seems to be to do with networking and databases and that kind of thing, which I think is entirely to be expected with essentially what is just a client like this. But what I'm going to do now I have those files safely recovered is I'm going to run another utility called TestDisk. And what this will do is show us if there are any deleted partitions on the disk. So sudo testdisk. No, we don't want to log anything. And we pick our drive, SDB again. We'll assume it's an Intel partition table, obviously if it's NT or FreeDOS as we have on there at the moment. Just see what we have. So we want to analyze the disk, do a quick search, and of course that's found the existing partition. But what we can do is we can do a deeper search, and that will again scan through every single sector on the drive, just looking for remains of deleted file systems. So we'll let that run. It looks like that's going to run through pretty quickly, and then we'll see if we can find any evidence of any previous OSs on there. And it has found something which is very cool to see. So as you can see in the left hand column we have the letter D there, which means that these are deleted partitions, which is very interesting. So we'll just see if we can see any files. If we press P, it will list the files. So that is evidently the partition that's currently on there, although that's marked as deleted, which is a bit strange. I'm not quite sure why it's done that, but anyway, we'll go back and we'll check out this other FAT16. So this is a FAT16 partition greater than 32 meg. So this is obviously a much earlier one. Aha! Okay. So Eudora, which is... Do we have any... Oh, we have files in here. So Eudora was a email client back in sort of the late 90s, early 2000s kind of era. In fact, these files date back to 2001. I've got some files from 2010 on there. So yeah, perhaps somebody's emails on here, which is, I'm not sure if I should go digging through those, but I suppose it's all just boring corporate stuff, I guess. i386. So these look like Windows installation files, and these date back to 1996. So it's going to be Windows 95 or perhaps an early version of NT. Obviously, we've already found some references to NT on here, but what we can do is we can actually make this partition active again. So if I press right, I think the star makes it primary and bootable. Not that we're going to be booting from it because there didn't seem to be any kind of OS on there, but we'll make it primary and bootable anyway. We'll continue, and so we write the changes to the partition table. Yes. And you'll have to reboot for the change to take effect. Obviously this is an external USB connected disk anyway, so all I need to do is just switch it off and back on again. I perhaps should have ejected that. And we'll just mount this. Open in File Manager. Okay, so it's obviously seeing the file system, and there we go, look at that. So we have a recycle bin with a desktop ini file in it. That's probably not very interesting. Just take a look in it. Yeah, didn't really expect anything too interesting in there. Let's see if there's anything hidden in here. No. I'll just take a copy of these files in my home directory just for future reference. And we have 80 megabytes worth of files in total, so not enough for a complete operating system and everything else, I wouldn't have thought, although maybe back in 1996, you never know. So we'll take a look at the i386 folder on here. This should hopefully be a bit quicker, much faster seek times on my SSD here. And yes, these are Windows. This is... why is it sorted that? Oh, I see, it's sorted by date modified. So these are Windows installation files, aren't they? Just scroll down. I think we'll find these are for Windows NT. WinNT32, WinNT.exe. So yes, we actually have the installation media for Windows NT in here. So yeah, that's quite cool to have all of that intact. Obviously, I don't know if that's all actually working. It certainly seems like it would do. Just trying to look for any kind of README files that would indicate what version this is. But anyway, let's go back and check out the really interesting thing, which is this Eudora folder. Like I said, Eudora is or was an email client. As we can see here, we have some MBX files, which are mailboxes. Now, the inbox, unfortunately, is 0 bytes, so there's not going to be anything in there. We do have some log files. Let's just take a look at the log file, just so we can kind of work out what kind of dates this was used. So we've got 2007. Sorry, you don't have any new mail. 2007 too. So that log file is from 2007. That's very interesting. And we have an audit log here. Yeah, ad display. I remember all this. I remember I actually used Eudora back in the day, and I remember when they added ads to it to try to, because it was free, you see, and it was like an early example of sort of ad supported stuff, which of course is a bit of a scourge nowadays. But you know, an early pioneer in kind of ad-supported software. But this is just a log of various boring stuff. But the really interesting stuff that we want to have a look at, I suppose, it looks like we have something in the outbox. Yeah, trash is also 0 bytes. But if we have a look at this outbox, we should have some messages in here, and we do. And oh, we have an email address there, so I'll have to blow that one out. But yeah, evidently not a lot of email sent from this machine. We've got one from 2004, 2006, 2009. And what are these? Hello, have you got size 6 in the blue sol wide NK batwing style number? I guess that's a fashion thing. As I mentioned at the beginning, this machine came from a clothing retailer. So evidently people making stock inquiries. Thanks, Ian. There we go. Do we have any attachments? Anything that was sent as attached? Oh, we do. So from 2002, 2003, 2004, we have some Word documents and some Excel spreadsheets, and these are evidently some kind of reports, I think. Let's take a look. I do have LibreOffice on here, so hopefully that should be able to open these without too much trouble. Outlet memo. 12th of the 5th, 2003, to all outlet stores. Can we zoom in on this? Zoom. So, to all outlet stores, CC, Mark, Kim, Neil, Chris, area managers, Hannah at buying office, 3 for £10 promotion. The following styles will go into a 3 for £10 promotion starting Tuesday the 13th of May. String vests. At the moment, it is only string vests with the prefix PAM on the Kimball that are part of this promotion. So there we go, string vest promotion. Obviously, all the rage back in 2003. I certainly don't remember that particular fashion craze, but there we go. Let's see what else we have here. It looks like these are just notices about promotions and things. So yeah, casual wear, just reports on price reductions, particular promotions. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Just a bit of history of this particular machine, and we'll check out one of these spreadsheets as well. We'll just zoom in. I just spotted something else that's potentially quite interesting, so we'll go back to that. Oh, okay, so this is essentially exactly the same file, just as an Excel document. So they must have been generating those documents from Excel, which makes sense. The other thing I just spotted was this, cash collections. Some kind of... Oh, okay, this is some kind of internal memo. 2006, all pilot store managers. I would like to remind you all the following process is currently not happening in the stores. We need to ensure that all store managers and other team members who deal with cash collections and coin deliveries are fully aware of the process. Please see below 2 previous Eudora messages that have been sent on cash collections and coin deliveries. Finding a lot of missed collections not being reported to us. Well, that sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? Potentially, yeah. Yeah, so Securitas, if you're not familiar with them, are like a cash collection service. So they drive around in these armoured vans, and they dress like riot police, and they'll show up at shops and basically pick up the cash that they've taken for the day and take it away to who knows where, the bank. I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, so that's they're saying that they're just complaining that they're paying Securitas to pick up cash that isn't ready to be collected. So, oh, there's a phone number there. Typical internal communication from this kind of environment. But that's very interesting. That's an interesting piece of history there. Other than that, did we look at the best sellers? I'm not sure if we did. So She Loves It lines, 2003. So the best sellers, we've got, not quite sure what that is. Lucy Denim Sequin Beaded Jeans. So yeah, obviously specialise in women's clothing. I haven't really seen any reference to men's clothing here. So Parker Fur Hood, very nice. Yeah, so best-selling clothes, fatigue pants. Not quite sure what fatigue pants are. Yeah, interesting. I just had another thought, actually, which was, now we have a different file system, we should... Now let's just try this. We should be able to scan it again with PhotoRec and see if there are any deleted files from this file system as well. I think that's how it works. If not, I will edit this part out and we'll never know. Okay, and it did indeed recover some files. In fact, quite a lot of files, about 1 gigabyte's worth of files. And I've just been having a poke around in here, and this is all really interesting stuff. Oh, Windows NT 4 Service Pack 6. There we go. So Windows NT 4, and it was indeed, I think Service Pack 6 was the last service pack for NT 4 as well. Of course, Windows NT designed to be used in a networked environment first and foremost. Yeah, some more references to Oracle. So evidently this, I think as we'd already discovered, was running Oracle, which is cool. Oracle 7 database release, Oracle 8. Yeah. Have some GIF files here. I think we should definitely take a look at those. Oh, yeah, Oracle 8. Okay, so these are all to do with the Oracle. I assume it was the client rather than the server. Very nice graphics there from back in the day. Let's cancel that. Okay, so keep going. I think these are probably help files by the looks of it. I think we've stumbled across the help file for the Oracle database client. Yeah, more Oracle stuff in here, more of these GIFs. Yeah, these are evidently part of some kind of help installation stuff. Project Builder Basics. Working with projects. Again, more help documentation. I'm not sure what Project Builder is, if that's part of Oracle or what. We've got Report Builder, Query Builder, using database triggers. Again, this all looks like part of Oracle, potentially. Schema Builder. So what I've managed to ascertain just from picking through and recovering files and things, evidently this was running Windows NT 4. I found a lot of installation files and system files and drivers and things relating to that, so I think that's very safe to assume. And that was evidently running on a FAT partition, which is a bit unusual. I think NTFS was definitely a thing back in the days of NT4, but they must have had their reasons for setting it up that way. And of course this was running that Oracle database client as well, and the report builders and things, which perfectly understandable for a point of sale system. This would have, whatever proprietary software this was running, which unfortunately I don't think I've managed to find any evidence of, would have used Oracle in the back end to connect to a central server for recording transaction data and that kind of stuff. And also we managed to find those Excel spreadsheets and the documents generated from them, those reports. Perhaps they were generated with that Oracle report builder, maybe. And of course found some evidence of those being emailed internally to other users as well. So quite a good picture of this machine and how it was set up and how it was used, which is all of course part of its history, and of course very interesting to know. So I'm very happy with that. And so having explored it, I think the best that I can, it's time to decide what we're going to do next. So thanks very much for joining me. I hope you found this initial exploration of this machine interesting. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be carrying out those upgrades I mentioned, including a sound card and an original Voodoo card, if I can, to help this to reach its full DOS gaming potential. I'd also like to investigate the possibility of installing an internal power supply, maybe a Pico PSU or something like that. And, well, if you have any other suggestions, please do let me know down in the comments. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, as it really helps the channel out. I'd like to thank my patrons and channel members for their support. You can see their names up on the screen at the moment. And I'd also like to give a big shout out to my fellow channels CRG and What Crap Have You Bought Now, who have covered this exact machine on their channels in the past and whose videos were very useful for research. And big thanks to CRG in particular for finding the manual. I'll put links to those videos down in the description. Finally, don't forget to check out the December 2021 hashtag for the rest of this year's videos. There are some fantastic creators involved yet again this year. And thanks, as always, for joining me. Hopefully, I'll see you again next time.